the first thing I remember, I guess I was about 9 or 8. Yeah, the first thing I remember was being on the set of The Great Race, which would make sense at 8 years old, and visiting him on the set of The Great Race with Blake Edwards, and Tony Curtis was there, and Natalie Wood and Ross Martin, all dressed up as these outlandish, outrageous characters, and Tony was taking me aside and teaching me how to fence, and Pop was, you know, Pop and Peter Falk were doing their Max and Professor Fade imitations and stuff. And the first thing that I actually remember, isn't this sad? Now, nobody's gonna hire me after this because I should remember all the really poignant stuff. But what I remember is getting in his little golf cart that looked like the Fate Mobile that he drove, and Tony Curtis had one that looked like the Great Leslie's car, and Blake had one that had the Pink Panther all over it because Blake had just finished the Pink Panther movie, and they'd all race through the lot of wherever it was they shot, I think Universal, race through the lot to the commissary, cutting each other off and stuff like that, and in character, you know. So you push the button, Max, you know, and it was what a hoot, you know, for an 8-year-old kid. It's like, wow, man, if my dad does that for a living, cool.
The first time I met Jack on our first day of rehearsal for Long Day's Journey into Night in 1986, January of 1986. I had only seen Jack in one other movie because I was just, and still am, an ignoramus. So I had only seen Save the Tiger when it had first come out.
Well, the first time I met him was on the telephone. And he'd called up because he had just seen a movie I made called Joe. And he liked it and he wanted me to do Save the Tiger. So I had to go out to California to audition for him. And went over to his house for dinner, and he couldn't have been more gracious. And I was a little suspicious looking in those days. I had long hair and a beard and daisies on my velveteen blue jeans. But we hit it off, and I told him that I'd seen his movies and I always enjoyed them, but I didn't want to, if he were to choose me to direct this, I wouldn't want him I wouldn't want to see him in the movie. And he understood what I meant. He said, "That's right, kid, you keep your eyes open." So I got the job.
And in Washington, D.C., AFI, the American Film Institute, run by George Stevens Jr., was holding a retrospective of Jack's movies. And I thought, well, you idiot, the least you could do is like learn something about Lemmon, this legend that everybody goes gaga over every time we go in a room together. And I sat there and watched Some Like It Hot, The Apartment, Prisoner on 2nd Avenue. I was almost so nervous the next day about going into rehearsal. I almost didn't. I didn't sleep that night. I started gasping for air. I saw him there in the audience, and he said, "Hey, you rotten kid, what are you doing here?" You know, he said, "You invited me." "You bet I did. Teach you something." You know, and I remember just being blown away. And I was just all of a sudden deeply aware of this extraordinary man, this extraordinary actor, who up until this point, I knew as an extraordinary man, who was warm, who was, you know, successful and well off and hardworking and inquisitive and didn't quit. But I didn't realize he was, you know, well, like a genius in some ways. So that was a real eye-opener for me.
There was a story that he told me that I thought was very illustrative of his point of view, and he said that after he won his first Academy Award from Mr. Roberts, he was walking down the street in New York City with another actor, an actor who had been around in New York for years, was a well-respected character actor, but not somebody who had become famous. And they were walking down the street, and Jack, very uncharacteristically, but I guess this was when he was a younger man, was sort of going on and on about himself and saying, you know, how he'd won the Oscar, and he was kind of very full of himself. And the actor they were walking through the theater district, said to him, you see that guy over there, and you see that guy over there? They're just as talented as you are. The difference is that you got the role and they didn't, and you had the chance to show what you could do. And I think that that stayed with Jack for the rest of his life, because he was probably the most humble person I've ever met, given his accomplishments. And I think he realized how fortunate he was. And so when he was giving me advice, I think his advice was, look, you know, I can't tell you that these are the steps that you need to take to be successful in this business. All I can tell you is that you should work really hard and try and do the best that you can.
Jack and me having the first meeting was in a restaurant in New York on the Upper East Side when he already was doing the movie. I know we talked before that, but when he was definitely in and we were in New York, I had dinner with he and his wife, and I'll always remember it was a very crowded, Upper East Side, very young, loud restaurant, and he was the most enthusiastic guy in the restaurant, and I remember him as being incredibly sober, which is something he talked about, because I guess he made a decision to stop drinking any alcohol years before.
When it comes to unexpected moments, Jack Lemmon, of course, took the cake. It's probably the most famous moment in the history of the show, which now is entering its 9th year. And that was when we were talking about Days of Wine and Roses. And I was trying to make the point to our students, since I'm Dean of the Actors Studio Drama School, that's a class, so we're always trying to find something to learn. And I was pointing out, I said to them and to him, you know, the famous scenes, the straitjacket scene and the greenhouse scene when he smashes everything trying to find the bottle in his desperation and so on. Those are the famous scenes, but the scene that knocked me out was the quietest scene. The scene when Jack stood up for the first time in front of the AA meeting and said those historic words. And I like to get our guests to say them in front of our students. We like to hear them. I got Tom Hanks to say life is like a box of chocolates, and I just got Pierce Brosnan to say Bond, James Bond. So I tried to lead Jack into it. I wanted to hear him say it. I said, and you said, my name is Clay. And Jack finished it. He said, and I am an alcoholic. And I said to the students, you see how simple that was? No push, just something quiet and genuine from the inside out. And he repeated it. He said, and I am an alcoholic. And I said, yes. He said, no, Jim, I'm an alcoholic. And I said, is this Jack or Clay? And he said, this is Jack, I'm an alcoholic. And there follows maybe 10 seconds of absolute silence. We just sit there and look at each other, and then I went on. And afterward, his wife, Felicia, said to me, that's the first time Jack's ever said that in public.
What was amazing to me was how energetic he was, how incredibly excited he was to start a movie. And it sounds corny, but it was absolutely like somebody who had got his first job and was so thankful and so happy that he was actually got hired to do this movie, which to me, I'm sitting there thinking, you know, desperately trying to sound intelligent, Jack Lemmon, and to sound credible. And he's trying to express how excited he is and grateful he is, which was a really odd idea to me. But that's what I remember in the beginning. And that kind of intensity, that kind of enthusiasm did not wane for 1 second during the entire time and all the time afterwards of talking to him about it when it was all over. He was a kid in a candy shop.
The amazing thing about Jack is he was truly a Renaissance man in that not only was he a brilliant artist, a brilliant actor, but here's a guy who loved to play golf. That's commonly known, but he was so passionate about golf that in fact, when we were scheduling acting engagements for him, we had to work around the annual AT&T golf tournament, the Bing Crosby tournament that would take place, I think it's the end of January or early February every year. And I knew that those couple of weeks had to be carved out so that he could do that.
He always used to speak about the AT&T, the Pebble Beach Golf Tournament. It's the only amateur event in the PGA that's the only professional event for the PGA Tour that amateurs can play in. And it was started by Bing Crosby years ago as a way to sort of bang up the local economy in Carmel during the slow months. Jack had played in this tournament, I think, without barely missing any for about 200 years. He'd played every year and never made the cut. The cut is, after 3 days of playing, you have to have a certain score, below a certain score, in order to play on Sunday, the final round, and be in contention for the win. And you play with a PGA professional. And Jack spoke about this like it was the Crusades, like it was the search for the Holy Grail. And before I played golf, he would speak about golf and speak about the AT&T. And you know, as I said, when I started playing golf with him, you know, he'd take me out, which he was nuts. I don't know why he would take me out. I couldn't hit the ball. He could hit the ball. And you know, we'd go and tee off on a hole, and naturally a crowd, oh, there's Jack Lemmon. Look, Jack, let's go watch. So this little crowd would develop, you know, grow around the first tee. And Jack would take out his driver and hit this nice, smooth drive, generally find its way to the fairway. And of course, being young and stupid and inexperienced in the ways of golf, I would take my driver out and slash and burn for the life of me, trying to just get it down. It would just be a big banana off right into the woods, you know, and Jack would tee off and all. You know, I'd hit this big banana in the woods, and Jack would go, well, that's a piece of shit. You know, and all the people around would be laughing and thinking, you know, and shot after shot, I wouldn't hit it with ba-bing, ba-bum, and never a harsh word, never a criticism, you know, a couple of tips here and there. And I was awful, and he put up with it.
We would go to Pebble Beach every year and play in the AT&T Pebble Beach tournament. And it was wonderful doing it with Pop because his everyman quality was so omnipresent there. Every single person would come up to him and say, "You're going to do it this year, Jack. This year's the year. You're going to make the cut." Making the cut meaning that you play for as the pros do, 3 days, and if you shoot a certain score, you're allowed to play on the fourth day. In 33 years, 34 years of trying, my father never made the cut at Pebble Beach, and I think that was the only regret that he took to the grave with him. But he kept trying and trying every year, and all the people all the time rooted for him because he was them. You know, he was exactly what they would be at the Pebble Beach golf tournament, and he knew it. But he never lorded it. There was a certain humility about my father that I think really only comes from truly great people, great men or great women. And I think it comes out of true respect, not only respecting your craft and your art and doing your best, but respecting your fellow human beings. And no BS. I really think he did, and I think he really genuinely cared, and he really wanted to make the cut, but not for himself. He wanted to make it for everybody else, for all the people out there. And I think that's one of the great things about his work as well. It came through in every single line he ever said. Yeah, he wanted to do the best job he possibly could for himself, but more so for all those people watching.
I remember one night, late at night, we were shooting Save the Tiger downtown LA. And Jimmy Crabe, our cameraman, was setting up the lights, and I was off to one side talking to Jack in this dark, lonely street corner. And suddenly, out of nowhere, ran this little Mexican lady with an autograph book and said, you know, "Could I have your autograph?" And Jack looked at her and he said, "Jesus, I thought you'd never show up."
There's a moment in the play where Spacey, who plays Jamie, and I play Edmund, are really bummed out because Mom's shooting up again. She's a morphine addict, and she's shooting up again, and we all were desperate to be loved by Mom, and now she's off with, you know, her muse, morphine. And so Kevin's, you know, gonna tie one on. He's depressed. He's lying on the couch. I'm standing by the piano. There was a piano in the room. I think there was a piano. Was there a piano on stage? I think there was a piano on stage. which he always used to play afterwards. Anyway, you know, we're waiting for Dad to come in. And Jack's line was, "There's a gloom in the air you could cut a knife with." This is the line that Eugene O'Neill wrote. "There's a gloom in the air you could cut with a knife. There's a gloom in the air you could cut with a knife." So we're all bummed out. He comes in one night and says, "Hey, there's a gloom in the air you could shake a stick at." Well, I got to tell you, you know, it was as if Mom had just said, "Hey, fellas, I love you dearly. I've kicked the morphine addict. Let's go have ice cream." Because Kevin and I just lost it, just completely lost it. Thank God I had tuberculosis in this movie, in this play. Because I started heaving. I put my back to the audience and all you saw was this. You know, and Kevin, who was lying on the couch like this, you know, all depressed, just quickly, and Jack was just sort of like, "What? What?" You know, looking around. And I don't think anything happened on that stage for 10 minutes. I couldn't breathe. I remember thinking, I wonder if you can die from coughing and laughing too much at the same time, because something is going to break. Something's got to give.
This is a, swear to God, this is a true story. Every word I'm about to tell you is true. We go to Alaska fishing, and I'll make it short. We had a wonderful time, blah, blah, blah. We end up on a river one day, and we're fishing with fly rods. And it was the end of the day, and there's little fish called chars, and we're just catching little chars and tormenting them and letting them go. Unbeknownst to us, there was this big, huge rainbow trout, which is what we're all after, at the bottom of this pond. And my father is, this is back when he enjoyed a good Cuban cigar. And he smoked these blimps. They were, you know, like 4 feet long. And he had this magnificent rod and reel that, like, the reel was gold-plated and the rod was bamboo French, and probably worth multiple thousands of dollars. And he's got the big cigar and he's got the reel and he's throwing it in, catching the little chars and letting them go, and telling jokes, telling stories and this and that. We're all kicking back and listening to him and laughing. And all of a sudden, the rainbow comes up and hits and pulls him off the waterfall and into the river. And I mean, fully immersed down, gone for the count. And, you know, I thought, oh my God, Jack Lemmon's been killed by a trout. This is awful. And sure enough, boom, I look over and there I see his hand thrust above the water, holding an object high and dry. It wasn't the $10,000 French rod and reel, it was indeed the cigar.
You know, whenever I came into town, I'd give him a call and say, "Hey, what are you going? What's going on?" Hey, come over. You know, I'd come over and having a few people over, and this guy would say, "Hello, Peter, Greg Peck." "Hello, Mr. Peck, how are you?" "Hello." "Hello, Peter, this is Walter." You know, and Carol, his extraordinary wife, who was so bright and was such a fan of our show, and they were very much, it's very touching to see, you know, to Walter and Jack together and be so funny. I could tell you a funny I won't tell you a funny, it's the only funny story I can remember, but it's so, I can't say it because there's still people alive, but it was just, Walter had quite a sense of humor. It's quite a sharp sense of humor. And, you know, and I could see sometimes Walter would go on and Jack would just, "Walter, shut up."
Seeing the closeness between the two of them, for me, it was summed up on the set of a movie called The Grass Harp. Walter's son, Charlie, directed it, and they were shooting on location. I forget where they shot it. It was somewhere in the South, and it was freezing cold, and I was visiting on location, and they were shooting in this old house, the interiors, and there was no heat, and it was freezing cold, and they had some space heaters around, but Jack was there basically doing this as a favor to Walter and to Charlie, who, you know, he'd watched Charlie grow up, and I think he wanted to be supportive of Charlie Mathel, wanted to be supportive of his best friend Walter. There was a moment when I could just see Jack sitting there and he was like shivering, he was like freezing, it was just so cold. And I just remember the very simple moment of Walter coming over with a blanket and just putting the blanket around Jack's shoulders and just just to try and keep him warm. And I just thought in that gesture, it just summed up so much of that relationship. And then you go back to making Jack crack up, which really was, you know, they were really funny together. They were a great off-screen duo as well as an on-screen duo.
What is it that made Walter and Pop such great friends? I think it's a classic example of oil and water mixing. One of them was oil and the other one was water. They couldn't be more unalike. You put the oil and the water in the jar, the oil and the water are totally separate, but if you shake that jar really hard, they mix together. And I think that's why Walter and Pop got along so well. Does that make any sense?
The last time I saw Jack Lemmon was one of the sweetest times. We finished the film, went back to LA, and a good year or so later, out of the blue, he called me up and invited me to dinner at his house. And that was great. And I went up to his house, and you know, he's married, and at dinner was he and his wife, me and my girlfriend, and Walter Matthau and his wife. And I remember being there and just feeling like, then, a year later, I was like, whoa, I'm at Jack Lemmon's house with Walter Matthau. And I thought I had just arrived in Hollywood and this was so cool. And what I remember about it was how incredibly energetic the conversation was. And you get there, it's before dinner, and everybody is, you know, he and Matthau are arguing. They engage me in the argument. I just met Matthau, but Jack kind of introduces me to him. He's very sarcastic, Matthau, and it gives way to my sarcasm. And suddenly I find myself trading barbs with Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau in this house. And their wives had quite a few things to say too. And I knew that there was this one moment where Jack left the room and Walter Matthau, who I didn't know except for that one night, and he was quite acerbic and everything, but he said to me, you know, kid, Jack says you're the real deal. And I remember just having to hold on not to start crying because I thought, what? He told you that I was the real deal? And I knew at that moment that Walter Matthau didn't know me from Adam, was embracing me because his pal Jack said I was the real deal. And I just felt like this warm soup enveloped the back of my neck. And it was one of the best moments I've had being a director.
So are you the real deal, Foley? Come on, sweetheart. Tell me.
When we made Save the Tiger, we made it on location in downtown LA in their garment district. And this was a factory that made dresses, and Jack spent a lot of time talking to the workers there and talking with the salesmen, absorbing their lingo and immersing himself into that world. And when it came time for a take, the jokes would stop. He'd focus. He'd look in the mirror, make sure his tie was right, and he'd look at himself in the eye and say, "Magic time." And he'd turn and he'd lay it on you.
Magic time. Sometimes would be to himself, sometimes magic time.
For me, magic time also, when I think about Jack, it doesn't just refer for me to what he's doing or what he did on screen. For me, it was magic time was his life in general. I think that he valued his life. He valued the work, his passion for his work. Magic time was about the time that he spent with his family. Magic time was about his love of golf, playing golf. It was about his love of fishing, or it was about his love for, you know, his dog Chloe. Just walking Chloe the dog was magic time for him.
I remember once in oh God, I think it was the last round of golf we played. And I could tell, you know, there's a certain kind of in my experience, I've noticed when people get close to, or getting closer to dying, there's a kind of a lightness and a vibrance that kind of I feel like I can see. And you know, he still had a couple of years to go, but I could tell there was something going on, and we're going out to, I was walking him out, we're laughing about something for forget what we were laughing about. We were laughing about something, and we get to his car, and he's driving a Ferrari. I said, Jack, what the fuck? I said, what, you can tell me you got a girlfriend now? He said, fuck you, you asshole. I can drive what I want. And no, I love Fafo forever. See ya. And I'm thinking, you go, Jack. You go, brother. A bright red Ferrari. I said, where do you keep the clubs? They sit right next to me in the front seat. You know, and he puts them in like it's his, you know, like his buddy from the school days. And, but I just remembered thinking that this guy has an appetite for life and for work that I hope I can just remember to try to approach at least 10% of. And as far as I'm concerned, there will be the time that I spent with Jack was definitely magic time.
Ah, boy. Well, the last time I saw Pop was when I was holding him in my arms, and he stopped breathing. You know, sons and fathers, it's a fascinating thing. Even sons and fathers that are as close as Pop and I are, there's a lot of stuff going on, and I think for a son to be with his father when his father passes away is a very difficult thing on a number of different fronts, not the least of which is the realization of one's own mortality. But I was lucky enough to be holding Pop in my arms when he passed, and I loved him very much.
We end our evenings with the questionnaire, which was invented by the great Bernard Pivot for apostrophe and bouillon de culture. And so, Jack, I'm going to ask you, what is your favorite word?
Passion.
What is your least favorite word, please?
It'll work.
We've all been hoist with that guitar. What turns you on, excites you, inspires you?
I think the sound of children laughing.
What turns you off?
That's easy. Nails on a blackboard.
What sound or noise do you love?
Any good piece of music, classical or anything that Gershwin ever wrote.
What sound or noise do you hate, apart from?
Boo.
Boo. Okay, the moment you've been waiting for, Jack. What's your favorite curse word?
You forgive me, please? Sucking mother. You must understand this does not apply to all directors. That's a good girl. Sit. Chloe, sit.
Okay.
Sit, darling. That's a girl. Now stay there. Stay there like a
Chloe,
good girl.
what profession other than yours would you like to attempt? Jack.
Composing, I think.
Composing.
Yes.
What profession would you not like to participate in?
Selling anything.
Okay.
Any form of being a salesman.
Right. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive?
It's about time.